Hey, thank you everybody for coming back and joining us again. This show has been nothing but a privilege for me. I cannot express to you the incredible sentiment that I've been getting from a lot of people. I don't. If this show doesn't grow any more than it has been, and it's been growing pretty quickly, I'm very happy with the fact that we've been able to stimulate some intellectual curiosity with different people and maybe break some stereotypes and learn about different things. This is a very tenuous show that we're going to do now. I know maybe more people that are very close to me in my life that are going to be very angry with me just for doing this episode. And the reason why is because we are going to talk about vaccines. We're going to talk about vaccines specifically dealing with COVID. We're also going to go over vaccines when we talk about autism, and we're going to talk about a lot of myths, and we're going to use a lot of peer-reviewed studies in the show. And in doing so, I have found that certain people in my life, and maybe you are dealing with this also in your life if you're watching this episode, you've dealt with a situation where you're dealing with somebody. I just want everyone to understand, me and my guest, we don't get a paycheck from Pfizer. We're not bought and told to do anything. We're doing this because we genuinely believe statistics and science show a certain outcome. And I'm not even going to say what that outcome is. We're just going to talk about it during the show. But the thing I want to make very expressively clear is that there's no personal thing when we talk about what we're going to talk about today. It's almost like when I watch the Patriots play the Jets. I'm a Cowboys fan. I don't give a fuck who wins. It's one of these situations where I just want the truth to come out. So that's why I brought my guest on today. I'm very excited to have a show where we're going to talk about some actual facts and go over some things medically and scientifically. And this is Dr. Rocky Jedick, who's joining us today. Rocky is a major in the United States Air Force Reserve. He's a flight surgeon. He's also an MD, and he has an MBA. And Rocky, if you could talk about a little bit really quick, you before told me some of the qualifications that you had. You actually did specific COVID medicine?
Yeah, so I'm a board-certified emergency medicine doctor. So I work in the ER. That's my specialty. I dabble a little bit in flight medicine too. I've done that for the Air Force, and I'm in the reserves right now. I also do some aviation medicine for the FAA. So I do flight physicals for pilots, essentially.
I remember those flight physicals, man.
Yeah. The FAA is a little bit easier.
Yeah.
A little less strict. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, so like you mentioned, between August of 2020 to February, March-ish of 2021, I was doing COVID response. It was kind of like right in the throes of the pandemic, and a lot of people aren't even aware, but Texas was just devastated. And I went to 3 different cities. I think I was in Harlingen, Texas, which is down by South Padre.
Yep.
And then I went to El Paso, and then I went to Austin, ultimately. And each of those sites exclusively cared for COVID patients. We were working in convention centers in the city. So at one point, the Austin Convention Center literally was a makeshift hospital where we had a lot of patients, all COVID. We were spillover because of the hospital system was just over capacity. And so they were sending us all their COVID patients. And so took care of lots of COVID patients.
So let's go back in time to back then when we didn't know as much as we know now. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things. Number one, you did with your own eyes see hospital beds completely filled at certain points with COVID patients. That did happen, or did that not happen?
Oh, it definitely happened.
Definitely
100%. The thing is, it didn't happen everywhere at the exact same time.
Okay,
right?
And that was the point. The point for us with the 6 feet of separation and staying indoors or staying away from other people and wearing masks was so that the spike that we inevitably knew was going to happen would spread itself out over time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it was the whole concept of, like flattening the curve.
Flattening the curve.
We heard about initially. And I mean, we can get into that.
Yeah.
It's not my area of expertise. I'm not an epidemiologist.
Right.
But that was the concept, yeah. And I mean, definitely, when I was in El Paso, it was insanity. I mean, this was on the news. This is open source, but the Air National Guard had to come with their mortuary services and help just like literally haul dead bodies away. I mean, it was pretty crazy. Every single hospital in that city had a tent outside the hospital that had multiple patients, and then we were working in the convention center. And it was interesting at that time because you saw the different political debates. So essentially, I think at one point, the local judge had locked down the city because they saw these number of cases going up. They locked it down, but then ultimately, I believe it was the DA of Texas came in and felt that was inappropriate and they should open the businesses. And there was this essentially, an political argument between the two. And,
right.
And as I was there, the business would open, they'd shut back down, they'd open, they'd shut back down based on who was calling the shots. And I mean, I try not to get into that. I'm pretty apolitical. I just want to take care of my patients. But,
me too.
But that stuff was there. That stuff was happening for sure.
Second thing I was going to ask you is the big thing, if you ever listen to Joe Rogan talk about this often, comorbidities is always the thing that he brings up. It's like, of course, COVID is a real thing. Nobody's really saying that it isn't. Those people who aren't are just so outside the net standard deviation that I can't even listen to them. But we all know COVID's a real thing. But one of the things that a lot of people say is that like 4+ comorbidities that go along with the fact that they die from COVID. When you saw these patients in these places in South Texas, did you see a lot of? Were you aware of several comorbidities? Did you see a lot of people who did not have comorbidities also dying from this?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, if you have comorbidities, you're a less healthy person. Like you're going to have a worse form of COVID. I mean, statistically speaking.
One other thing, you can gain new comorbidities because of COVID. Is that correct?
That's 100% true.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing is interesting. So I mean, I'm trying to remember the time frame here because there's this pandemic has been so long now ongoing. There was a table that came out by the CDC at one point, and I think it was 6%, 6 point something percent, where they said that this 6 point whatever it was percent of people were the people that literally only had an ICD-10 code, which is the way we code diagnoses in medicine, of only COVID. And so the implication was, well, everybody else has something else going on.
Right.
So if you're healthy and you have none of these other medical problems, you're only that 6%. But then when I actually pulled up that table, and that was being like just proliferated across social media to basically say like, if you're healthy, you don't need to worry about COVID. But then when you look at these different diagnoses, the different quote unquote comorbidities, a lot of those were just other terms for COVID.
Right.
It was like pneumonia
or trouble breathing or something like that.
Yeah, there was like multiple different categories that were just different ways that we in medicine talk about what a respiratory illness is, which is what COVID is.
But not only is it a respiratory illness, this is the first time that this specific version of SARS has existed in Homo sapiens. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's true. It's the novel coronavirus.
Right.
Well, the other thing I wanted to mention though too, before we move on, most people that you know and interact with, most people that I know and interact with, we live in the United States of America.
Yeah.
We all eat most of us eat the American standard diet.
Of course.
Most of us, if we pulled up a BMI calculator and you plugged in your numbers, you might be obese.
Yes.
Your friend might be obese. Your dad's probably obese.
Right.
So to say, only people with no comorbidities and you kind of put them to the side as if those people, it's their fault that they got COVID or they got a worse version of COVID. It's not really fair or accurate because so many people that we know, we love, we hang out with, people that are meaningful to us in our lives and that we value have comorbidities. And a lot of those comorbidities aren't necessarily lifestyle ones. They're ones that people are born with. I mean, it's not your fault if you're born with asthma or certain other things. So, I mean, the whole comorbidity thing, it is important for me as a doctor to know, like, if this person has comorbidities, they may have a more serious version of COVID if I'm making the diagnosis. If I'm offering this other therapy we have called monoclonal antibodies, I kind of have to risk stratify, like, what's this person going to have? But to be honest, like, aside from that, most people have comorbidities, and we can't like just discount that,
Yeah.
So there's lots of areas that you can go down to kind of punch holes in this whole like we don't need to worry about COVID because of the comorbidities thing, if you know what I'm saying.
So I hadn't had the flu in 35 years. I did not expect that COVID would affect me, and I'm almost certain that I've gotten it. I live in Las Vegas. I'm around people all the time. At some point, I probably contracted it and didn't. I was asymptomatic. If that is the case, my concern was not for me. It was for my 80-year-old mother. Mm-hmm. And until the two of us had gotten vaccines, had gotten vaccinated, and I got vaccinated early because I'm a retired U.S. military officer and I'm a disabled vet. So I got vaccinated early. Because of that, then I went back and saw her. For me, it was not a political choice. It was nothing to do with how I felt about it. It was a statistical decision. It was a decision strictly based on statistics. I knew that my mother, being 79 years old, put her in a very risky situation, and I hadn't seen her in 2 years because of the pandemic. So that's why I chose to take it. I did not take it because of, like I said, a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to, again, I'm going to get a little off topic for a second, then we're going to get back to this. Did you feel, and I felt like this, that using the mask specifically as political statements, and I mean both political parties, using the mask as a political statement, Donald Trump walking around with no mask for certain periods, and then we had Joe Biden with the biggest motherfucking mask you've ever seen in your life that went up to his ears, and it was big, bright blue to show you, do you want to support the Democrat Party? Wear the mask. And I thought that was dangerous, because what does that mean if I don't want to support the Democrat Party? And I didn't vote for either one of them because I both believe they're 70-year-old men that kind of have, come up with the same upbringing. Yeah. But the point is, like, did you feel like that was dangerous? How I felt like both sides were using this as a political toy.
I mean, everything about the pandemic being politicized has been problematic.
Yeah.
It's made our jobs in healthcare so difficult.
Right.
Because now we're in this position where I have a patient that comes in and they have a certain political position. they come in with that context, and I'm trying to take care of them. They have COVID. Maybe they didn't get vaccinated because of their political position. It's automatically a contentious situation.
Yeah.
And oftentimes these patients want to kind of entertain with me as their provider, like a political discussion. I don't want to be part of that, and so it's really frustrating. I don't understand why, looking back in 2020, similar to, we just celebrated the 20th anniversary of 9/11, right?
Yes.
So 9/11, we had a common enemy against all Americans come in and attack us, right? And what was the response? For at least for a short period of time, we saw some of the most unification we've seen in the United States, right? A decrease of polarization. We had this community feel of, we're all in this together. We're responding to a common threat. I don't understand why in 2020 we couldn't have done that.
Well, I'll postulate a hypothesis.
Yeah.
The 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which allows for each state to make their own decisions, whereas when we went to war with Iraq, we were not afforded that. It wasn't like troops from Texas chose to not go while troops from Mississippi chose to go. We all went. The U.S. The armed forces, all 4 million of us that went over there in Iraq in 2003, when we went over there, we did so from every state in the Union, in Alaska, Hawaii, even from Puerto Rico. So from that point, because our children and our brothers were over there, our sisters and our mothers were over there fighting, that's why we were unified. And even the people who were against the war were still for the troops, right? I think in this situation, DeSantis and Newsom can't be in the same room together, right? You can't have Greg Abbott and, the governor of, I forgot the guy, Cuomo. They're not going to be in the same room room together. And not only that, they've become famous because of this. Now, I live in Nevada, and I know who the governor of Florida is because of the news that he's making. But whereas, I bet most people here don't know the governor of South Carolina, or they don't know the governor of Idaho, but they know about DeSantis. Why? Because he made a political stand on a medical issue, and so did Gavin Newsom, and so did Greg Abbott. So it's I think that's what the situation is because think about the fact that Greg Abbott and Gavin Newsom can do completely different things over the areas that they're governed because the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution allows for states' rights. That's why I think there's a difference.
Yeah, but we've gotten to this point where things have been this politicized, where the politicians can either play the system and gain political points by taking a side or not.
Yes.
And we didn't necessarily have to go down this road, is my point. I mean,
agreed.
Yeah,
I agree with that part.
And I agree with the military side, like you said, in 9/11, that did unify us, but we were unified before that, right? I mean, part of that was I think the approach that was intentionally taken by the leadership of the country at the time. I mean, whether or not you love George W. Bush or not, I think he used that as a moment to try to unify the country. Right. And I think we could have done so with a virus that was affecting not only just Americans, but literally all human beings. Like, how could we not rally around that and try to come together? But instead, we chose to go down the path of politicizing each little piece of this, you know, trying to actually score points, and that's where we're at now. Like you said with the masks, I don't want to get too much into that, but yeah, it makes our job harder.
We'll circle around back to that if we have time. I know you have a heart out, and the main thing I wanted to get from this is the misconceptions about vaccines or medicine in general. You talked about people being able to lay people trying to become experts in these subjects without having a medical degree. Do you have a list of the most common misconceptions that you feel people get wrong?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them, and most people have probably seen them on social media. I'm trying to think which one you'd want to talk about first.
So let's
if
just
you want
talk
to
about
maybe just ping a couple of them. Actually, let me start with an anecdote, though.
There you go.
And then maybe if you have questions about different misconceptions, different myths, things that you hear that you see on the memes, right? We can go ahead and just tackle them one by one. But this is I think a great anecdote for my experience over the last week. I've worked 7 days in a row, worked night shift. Taking care of quite a few COVID patients. I think the surge that we were seeing a month ago is not quite as bad, so that's good. I'm hopeful about that, but I'm still seeing quite a few COVID patients. One of my shifts, I had 2 different patients that came in roughly the same time. Okay, one was a 99-year-old person, literally was going to turn 100 in the next month. Okay, and the other one was very young. I'm not going to say the exact age. I think it's probably better to not give too many qualifiers. But,
of course. But
a young person and had no medical conditions, no pre-existing conditions. Mm-hmm. The first one, the elderly person, also quite healthy for their age, was vaccinated, but was positive for COVID. I discharged that person. Got to go home. Okay. Checked them out. They weren't feeling well. Gave them a couple of little treatments and sent them home on their way. Other person, which was just literally 3 rooms down, young, previously healthy person, came in with an oxygen saturation that was prior to COVID, I would say was not compatible with life. Like this person would
What
be
is that
dead.
number? Like, is it below 80? What is the?
Oh, much below 80.
Much below 80.
I mean, like, yeah, in COVID, we see patients that'll initially, when we first put them on the oxygen saturation, that'll be in the 40s, 50%.
O2 stats in the 40s.
Yeah, I kid you not.
Okay.
We never saw that before COVID. We call it now the happy hypoxic COVID patient.
Yeah.
The patient that's like talking, they're walking.
You did aerospace physiology in the military. Remember when they put you in the pressure chamber?
Yeah,
right?
of
And
course.
You didn't remember what your name was while you were in there, so like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, they make you hypoxic. And
Correct.
And you feel, you know,
Have you ever seen videos of yourself when you're hypoxic? You don't remember any of that shit?
I don't have my video, but I have a great video of a guy doing the cards. Have you seen that one?
No, I was doing the cards.
The guy's flipping the cards.
Dude, I was sitting there like rhyming and shit, and
Yeah.
I don't remember any of it. So basically, for those of you who don't know, when you're in the military, they do this thing called aerospace physiology, just to make sure that blood vessels don't pop. And you also get to see whether or not, whenever you go hypoxic, for me, my elbows start to itch when I go hypoxic.
Okay.
That was my sign. You get to figure out my ankles start to itch. It's really weird. Some people, their lips turn purple. In this case, they suck all the air out, and you see this. There's the surgical glove, and it inflates because there's no pressure in the room. And then you get to see what you're like when you're hypoxic. I remember none of it.
Yeah.
Because there's no oxygen in the room. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that is funny though. Yeah, they give you the questionnaire. You're sitting there with this questionnaire, and you're checking out the symptoms that you're feeling. Like, okay,
I'm starting
to feel a little euphoric, and then you also have math problems.
Yeah.
Remember that? You start to do your math problems.
And then I drew a circle during the math problems. I remember, yes.
Yeah, so oxygen is important. We need oxygen.
Yeah.
The brain needs oxygen to work. Yeah, so to kind of go back to the story, the second person, young, previously healthy, and not obese. Not obese. I think that's important to say because everyone wants to bring up obesity.
Correct.
This person was just very normal in terms of their stature. And that person, I had to put on the most aggressive type of oxygen therapies I had to not have to intubate them. And I had to have a discussion with them, I may need to intubate you. We may need to put you on the ventilator. And that person, I had to admit to the ICU. And that person was unvaccinated. Okay. And I'm not saying that every single case plays out that way, but when you talk to anybody in my space, emergency medicine, critical care medicine, they all have the exact same story. I have friends in this space in multiple different states. You can pull up like the different, there's all these memes going around, the iconographs where they show like the number of people, number of people total that are blue, and then orange they'll have the unvaccinated. And it's hospitalization, ICUs, ventilators. You see a much, much, much smaller percentage of people that are in that unvaccinated group that are coming in with serious enough disease to be hospitalized or put on a ventilator. That's just a fact. And that's what I'm seeing anecdotally. That's what my friends are seeing. And that's what we're seeing across the country.
Okay, so there's that one. Natural immunity versus getting a vaccine. That would be another one. So the idea that, I've already had COVID, I'm better off not getting a vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer to that is COVID comes with a lot of risks.
Yeah.
I mean, so why would you want to go through potentially getting COVID, having potentially long COVID syndrome, which we're learning more and more about.
Long haul COVID.
Long haul COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had multiple patients that come in months after COVID. I had this one guy that came in not too long ago. He comes in, he's really short of breath, he's on oxygen. He's been on oxygen since he's had COVID, which was months ago. I do a CT scan of his chest because I'm worried about a blood clot in his lungs because that's also something that we see in COVID patients.
So before we keep that thought, you
Yeah.
can get blood clots from the vaccine, or possibly, right? We haven't done all the testing on it, but the likelihood of you getting a blood clot from COVID versus a blood clot from the vaccine, what order of magnitude are we talking about as far as the difference?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but I mean, so generally speaking, the blood clots with the vaccines, the ones that we do know about is this very specific type of blood clot that affects a vein in the brain. Okay, we call it the central venous thrombosis. Okay. And we saw a link, or we started to see a weird link, and it really wasn't even just seeing that clot, but it was seeing that clot after vaccination also with a very unusual lab abnormality, which was low platelets. And when they saw those two data points, they were like, this is interesting. Like, that's statistically improbable. We have these two different things happening. They started to look into it more.
Yeah.
And they recognized that it was linked to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That's when they put it on pause. They did this very thorough record review, and they found out what the number was that they were seeing that in.
Was it all the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, or was this a hot batch? Like, what was the situation?
I don't think it was just a certain batch. I think it was just the Johnson & Johnson. And it was also something similar that they were seeing with the AstraZeneca one, right? Which again, like these ones are not the mRNA ones, which is funny because everyone's always worried about the mRNA, new technology.
Yeah, Johnson & Johnson actually. So this is another thing, right? Ready? Yeah. So you want it one way or the other, right? You want either no mRNA technology or you don't want a live virus. The mRNA is supposed to replace the live virus. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, correct. It's a quote unquote new technology, even though they've been working on it for decades.
Okay.
And we can talk specifically about that, but basically making an mRNA molecule stable enough to survive in the body long enough to build whatever type of protein they're trying to is actually challenging.
Yeah.
And so it took them a long time to kind of perfect that technology so that the mRNA will exist in the body long enough to run through the ribosome, which is this machine in the cell that creates the protein, and spit out the spike protein. So, I mean, Yeah, mRNA is a newer technology. It's different. We haven't used it for a vaccine before, but theoretically, it should be actually safer because you're actually not getting vaccine or
You're not
vaccine
getting the
components.
virus in there. You're not getting,
virus. Yeah,
you're
sorry.
not getting you are not getting an attenuated virus in the vaccine.
Thank you. Yeah, I said vaccine. I meant to say virus. Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, so oldest technology. You go all the way back to smallpox. That wasn't even vaccination. That was inoculation, right?
Yeah.
So literally, they would take a person that had smallpox, some weeping sore.
Yeah.
They would come and they would scrape off the pus, and they put it into another person.
Do you still have the scar on your shoulder from your smallpox?
I do, yeah. I got the smallpox,
too.
yeah.
I still have my smallpox scar.
See, so military guys, we're used to vaccinations, right?
Yeah.
We've gotten anthrax, I've gotten smallpox, I've gotten, like all the big ones that nobody else gets. But
yeah, and apparently I'm being controlled by Bill Gates. There's a machine inside of me that's controlling me because I've got that. Okay, two things real quick. MR. So the confusion. We'll go over a couple misconceptions. We'll go back to the ones you said before. DNA. RNA. This seems to be a very difficult confusion for people. For instance, vaccines, all vaccines manipulate the RNA of a human being. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say all vaccines. Definitely the mRNA.
I'm sorry. I meant to say viruses. We're getting these two words mixed up.
Yeah,
again.
no, they are tricky. They're both V's, right?
Yeah, viruses.
Yeah.
So whenever I hear people complaining about, well, this mRNA thing is changing your DNA. First of all, that's a misnomer. And the second idea is that viruses themselves change your RNA. Is that correct?
Yeah. So let's tackle that first one because that is a common myth that people are seeing.
Yeah.
People are calling this gene therapy. They
Yes.
say it's changing your DNA. So, I mean, just Google a video. How does mRNA vaccine work? And you can see this. I mean, but use a reliable source, please. Don't just pull some random guy on YouTube that says
Listen,
he knows.
guys,
it,
I don't real quick. I don't have a problem with you guys using Facebook. It needs to be Facebook and something else, and the website it needs to come from. It can't just be some 5-letter website that you found. Like for instance, one of the things that I sent you the other day because we have questions that we got from other people about some that are against vaccines, and one of them was a website that was basically completely all about getting rid of climate change, like climate change deniers. It was a climate change denier website basically against vaccines. And I was like, this is not a reliable source. I'm not even saying the information is incorrect. You just can't, this is not a scientifically proven source. This is not peer reviewed is basically what I'm saying. Go ahead and back to what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, and we can get into that too. I mean, because obviously I have a certain approach whenever someone tells me anything.
Yes.
Like that I'm going to run through to make sure, am I going to verify that's true or false?
Right.
Okay. But we can talk later about that if that's interesting. But, because people should have an approach. You shouldn't just allow any information that is going to come to your attention, just consume you and just assume that it's true. You should have a intentional approach, and that's going to help you the rest of your life in terms of determining true and false, or at least likelihoods of truth and false, which is really everything that we can do is determine.
That's a whole
likelihoods.
podcast by itself.
Yeah,
exactly.
So let's just make it as simple as possible. Okay, DNA in the nucleus makes messenger RNA. Messenger RNA leaves the nucleus, goes into the cytoplasm, finds the ribosome, and then it makes the protein. The mRNA vaccine, it comes in as the mRNA into the cytoplasm, not the nucleus, no effect on the DNA.
So the DNA is always in the nucleus. Got it.
Yeah, it has no interaction with the DNA at all. It goes into the cell. The ribosome finds it. It makes the spike protein. Spike protein is put on the outside of the cell, and then when the immune system comes by, it says, "Ooh, spike protein, that's bad. Let's start building antibodies to it." And that's as simple as how it works.
When we talk about an mRNA vaccine, and people are like, "Oh, this mRNA vaccine is affecting my DNA," and then I'm like, "Well, that's what a virus does. It affects your RNA as well, right? Does the virus? Am I incorrect in this? The virus corrupts your RNA, then it replicates itself."
Yeah, that's what the virus's goal is.
Okay.
Is to get into the cell and actually get into the DNA.
Yeah.
And try to cause it to self-replicate.
So the point I'm trying to make is this thing you're complaining that the vaccine does, the virus was already doing. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, similar.
You understand what I'm saying? Again, now
totally.
let's take that same logic. The thing you're complaining about the blood clots, the virus also creates blood clots. Is that correct?
That's true. At a much greater magnitude. Let's
go back to this one more time. You are complaining about RNA being manipulated through the virus. Through the vaccine. The virus already manipulates your RNA. You are complaining about blood clots from a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The virus already creates blood clots. Man, I cannot say
myocarditis.
Myocarditis.
Yeah.
Myocarditis. There has been a link between certain vaccines and myocarditis, right? Is that correct? This is what they're talking about. Joe Rogan had a guest on talking about that also.
Yes.
But she said that the factor of you getting myocarditis from the virus compared to the vaccine was 100 to 1. That was the number she used. Have you read anything similar?
Yeah, that is similar. I was looking at this data not too long ago about the blood clots, and I'll have to look it up afterwards maybe, but I want to say it was like 4 in a million versus 40 in a million, or it might have been 4 in a million versus 400 in a million. But the point is, and this is actually a really good point that you're bringing up.
Yes.
You're not comparing vaccine to nothing. I'm not going to come on here and say the vaccine is risk-free, 100% risk-free. You know, there's no one's having any problems with it. The most common thing is you have an allergic reaction. You can get a really severe allergic reaction.
Yeah.
Those of us that maybe were alive during the time of Macaulay Culkin's movie My Girl remember that the poor guy died of anaphylaxis for getting stung by a bee.
Yeah.
That happens, you know. So yeah, there are risks. The risk is not zero, but the risk is super, super low. About as low as almost any type of therapeutic you can take.
Yes.
Because we've given this now to, I think, 175 million
in the world, 3.2 billion people on the planet have been vaccinated.
Yeah, I think actually
it's 43% of the Homo sapien population
I wrote it
has
down,
received at least one of the has received at least one dose of the vaccine. But let's go back to what we were saying before.
176 million fully vaxxed in the United States as of September 7th.
So just for reference, there are 330 million people in the U.S., 176 million.
176 as of 7 September. So people got vaccinated.
So let's just go back to this initially. Again, we talk about this frequently on the show. It's a sports reference: wins against replacement. You're not comparing Tom Brady to zero. You're comparing Tom Brady to an average quarterback. You're not comparing the vaccine to zero. Right. You're right. There is a correlation between blood clots and the vaccine. You're not comparing it to zero. You're comparing the vaccine to a high likelihood that at some point you will be exposed to COVID. And when you look at the statistical probability of a stroke from COVID or a stroke from the vaccine, it is 100 times more likely to happen from COVID than from the vaccine. That is the point. That is what the peer-reviewed science is saying for us. That's the thing we're trying to say. Of course, this is where we get into this argument where it's like, well, there's some risk of the vaccine. Of course, there is some risk. Nobody's saying that there isn't. What we're saying is in some cases it's 100, some cases it's 1,000 times more likely that you're able to have a problem with this. SARS-1 was also similar. We said before, you said that they've been trying to use this mRNA technology for a long time. We've had some practice, the community that creates vaccines, some practice trying to isolate the protein for SARS-1. Is that correct? Which aided us in developing a vaccine for SARS-2 this quickly.
Actually, I'm not sure. I haven't read enough about that to really comment on that. But I think it might be helpful to just kind of summarize a couple of things we talked about.
Sure,
right
sure.
Here.
Go ahead.
Let's just take a hard stop. So one. Yeah, we're always comparing vaccine to COVID.
Yes.
If you're not doing that comparison, you're just not being
not vaccine to nothing. Vaccine to COVID.
Vaccine to COVID.
Got it.
Yes, exactly. So I equate that, a perfect analogy is the seatbelt, okay? Mm-hmm. If you wear your seatbelt, you wear the seatbelt appropriately, you can still get injured by the seatbelt. We have a thing in medicine called the seatbelt sign. So we could say the seatbelt, it's a little risky. It has a risk. The risk is not zero of wearing it. But when you wear your seatbelt appropriately and you're driving 70, 80 miles an hour on the freeway and you get in a car accident, you are willing to take that risk of having a very small injury to your body for the benefit that you're going to have from that accident.
A broken collarbone versus being thrown out of the car.
Exactly. Going through the windshield, right?
Got it.
And it doesn't mean that you're not going to die. People die wearing their seatbelt.
Yeah.
But it means, and people get COVID with the vaccine, but it means that your likelihood of getting the most serious version of COVID, of dying of COVID, is much, much, much less likely, just like the seatbelt's going to prevent you most likely from dying.
So even though that this current version of this vaccine might not protect me from a Delta variant or from getting COVID in general, I'm still less likely to suffer severe symptoms because I've received both shots.
For sure. And that's actually the intent of the vaccine.
Okay.
Is to prevent hospitalizations, to prevent severe disease, to prevent death. And we hope that it will also decrease the likelihood of mild disease, and in doing so, also prevent transmissibility. And it does look like that's also true, but probably a little bit less so than those other things. But those are the things we really care about, right? The severe disease and death.
Yeah.
Like if you get a mild version of COVID, you're still in the same place, 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
But if you end up with, severe injury to your lungs and you can never really run a mile again, or if you end up racking up something that people aren't talking about is like the cost of hospitalization too.
Yes.
You run up the financial cost of an ICU visit or even just a hospitalization. I mean, biggest cause for bankruptcy in the United States is medical bills. I mean, people aren't talking about that. So if you prevent the hospitalization by having the vaccine, that's a huge benefit. Or if you don't die. I mean, I think that needs to be stated.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I love that we went over that point. Now here's the next one. This is the one I hear the most common. Okay, I was vaccinated and I can still catch the virus. Right now, this is a binary thing we've done. Ready? I was vaccinated or not vaccinated. I can catch the virus or not catch the virus. This is an on and off switch. It's a 1 or 0. The world doesn't work like that. The world works in a spectrum. It works in statistical probabilities. The probability that I will catch the virus unvaccinated versus vaccinated. Do we have any numbers percentage-wise on those?
I think that there has been some stuff published on that. I don't have it readily available in terms of transmissibility. We assume that it's going to be lower because, just theoretically, it makes sense. So what the vaccine does is it primes the immune system. So you're kind of ready to fight the battle, right?
Okay.
You come in, you already have a ready-made defense. So if you're exposed to a smaller viral load, you should probably be able to knock that out in some cases completely without ever getting to the point where the infection takes on enough cells to replicate it's even measurable and that you have even symptoms. So theoretically, that should make sense.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know what the numbers are there.
So, but even though, again, it's one of these situations where it's like I have been vaccinated or not vaccinated, the percentage chance of me catching the virus is lower because I have been vaccinated. So when I see TikTok videos showing how stupid we are for getting vaccinated because we can still catch the virus, that is intellectually lazy because you are not providing statistical context for that. It is like I remember before we were talking about 80, 95% effective for some of the vaccines. Those numbers have changed and they probably will change. And as the virus mutates, those numbers will probably go down, but they're still higher than what they are. The probability of you not catching the virus is still higher that if you have the vaccine than if you don't have the vaccine.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, when you think about those numbers, how ridiculously good those numbers are, they were initially saying, if people can recall back in 2020, what type of vaccine do we need to meet? I think they were saying if we can make a vaccine that was, I think it was 55 or 60% effective, we can potentially end this pandemic. And we ended up, with a vaccine that was over 90%. I mean, you look at the influenza vaccine, which is an effective vaccine, but it's nowhere near in the same ballpark as this vaccine.
So the influenza vaccine does not have the same protection rate as the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, exactly. Because the influenza virus mutates at such an interesting and rapid rate that it makes it really challenging. Because every year the influenza vaccine is different than the previous year.
Right.
And so we see that genetic shift with that particular virus because not all viruses are created equal. Okay. That's why the herd immunity for different viruses differs. The R naught differs. The way it mutates, the characteristics of the virus changes. So, an HIV virus is different than a hepatitis virus, is different than a coronavirus, is different than, an influenza virus.
Okay.
And a lot of people, I feel like that are in the lay population don't understand that and they don't care to learn that.
I got a question a couple minutes before I walked in here. It has to do with vaccines, specifically dealing with impotency and pregnancy. Is there any peer-reviewed study on that so far?
Yeah, actually, the CDC. Let's take the pregnancy one first because that's a big question. And that's a big question that a lot of people are asking. And when someone's pregnant, they're much more concerned about things that they do to their body, they put in their body, even from eating ham sandwiches to playing with turtles to whatever it is. Definitely medications. The CDC came out with a report. I think it was in July. After they were actually a little bit. They wanted to be very careful with hard recommendations for pregnant patients, just for the reasons we talked about. And they did a large review, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. You can pull that data up if you want. But they saw that it was much more risky to get COVID as a pregnant patient in terms of risk to the baby and risk to the mom. So
again, it's not that the vaccine is completely 100% safe. Maybe you say 99% safe, but
actually, even just stop on that point because in that particular paper, they didn't find any specific increased risks to pregnant patients for the vaccine.
Okay,
so it was deemed safe. They didn't see any type of unique complication that was going to apply just to the pregnant patients.
But COVID is not safe for someone who's pregnant.
No, and what's interesting? So I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I was talking to some people. I have some friends and family members that are pregnant. Do you recommend this? I'm like, I think that we're going to have a hard recommendation for this. I was like, we don't yet, but I think we do and the reason that is because I was hearing from ICU doctors in other states, people that I'm friends with, people that I talk to that I know socially, about the large number of pregnant patients on ventilators, something that they'd never seen before. And then babies that they were delivering in the ICU. So I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I was like, well, that's interesting. People are already talking about this, and also my own personal experience. I had 2 previously healthy young women come in with mild COVID, pregnant, and I put an ultrasound probe on her belly, which we do in the ER all the time. We do a lot of ultrasounds, and I had to diagnose what we call fetal demise. I had to tell these 2 different women that their babies had died. And again, like me being the scientist, I'm like, okay, was that due to COVID? I don't know. I really need to see the statistics because I'm trying to not be swayed by my own anecdotal experience. But that stuck out to me, right?
Yeah.
So I diagnosed 2 fetal demise in COVID patients that had mild COVID, and they were young and healthy, both in like their 20s. And so I started to see that. And so when the CDC finally came out with this, I was like, okay, I'm not surprised. Because COVID ravages the human body, and it's not going to spare a pregnant patient, and when you're pregnant, you're already at higher risk for blood clots and higher risk for lots of other things, and you're somewhat immunocompromised. And so then you get COVID, and you're going to have a worse course, and that means the baby's not going to do as well. So now the CDC has a hard recommendation, and that's also supported by what we call ACOG, which is basically the academic and professional society of OBGYN doctors. They have a hard recommendation for vaccination during pregnancy. And then the second one you mentioned was fertility. And that's become like a new thing. I think it was just some social media posts about a guy with a swollen testicle and, this is due to COVID, and there's absolutely no evidence for that these stories have not even been verified. You can look around on Twitter at some of the funny comments going back and forth about that. But no, that's just not true.
Okay, the next big one, the 13,000 deaths that have happened because of the vaccine that have been reported. Now, apparently this is just a screenshot from a Facebook post that's done without context, and apparently this is from it's a Mars or Mayor's website?
It's VAERS. Yeah.
VAERS website.
So gosh, VAERS is right now, I feel like it's like every physician and healthcare worker is just like worst nightmare. Yeah, it's terrible. I got a little interested in VAERS the other night. I was working a shift and it was a little bit on the slow side. The middle of the night, the wee hours. So I just pulled up VAERS and I was trying to figure out how to extract the data from it and look at it. And I was looking at how you can even put in the data. And I was able to get to the last step. And the only reason I didn't press submit
because you would screw up the data.
Because it gives you a final little blurb that says, if you are misrepresenting data, this is potential risk for, I don't know if it said felony or something, but basically it kind of has a hard line there. But I'd gotten all the way to the point where I'd put in this totally phony information. I was Frank the Tank. I'm his son. Frank the Tank died by driving into the median of a high, in the highway, driving home from getting his vaccine, and I know the vaccine did it. And I could have pressed that button, and that would have gone in as a death.
Okay.
A death associated with the vaccine. So when you pull this data, when you look at this data, it's all just entered by anybody that wants to. We could go up there right now.
It does not have to be health. This is really important. The VAERS information does not have to be input by a healthcare professional. And the standard that you need is that someone has died within 28 days of receiving a vaccine. Doesn't care if they were hit by an alien or a meteor or run over by a truck. You can still report it as a death related to the vaccine because they died within 28 days.
Yeah. So, healthcare workers are mandated to put in these reports when there is a known adverse effect from a vaccine.
Yeah,
that's true. But you don't have to be a healthcare worker to go ahead on to VAERS and put that. And I almost don't want to mention that on this podcast because the people that are on here that are anti-vax will do this. And we have all kinds of documented cases where people are just putting in phony data, and some people are just being trolls, because they think it's funny. And when you read the data, you can see that. And so the point is it's kind of like when we say in medicine and specifically of evidence-based medicine, or when you're doing like research medicine, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And so you're putting garbage in to VAERS. You can't extract that information and expect to have a good paper or good data. So you're right. You mentioned this 13,000 deaths. Yeah. I think it's now above 14,000 when I looked at it.
Actually, they've tailed the number down when they've done some research about it. If you go look at that actual file, it's below 6. It actually, they went from the ones they've been able to verify, they moved the number back down to 6,000. 14,000 people have still reported on VAERS that someone's died because of vaccine. The point is, this is less than reliable. This doesn't even this is.
Well, it's totally unverifiable.
It's totally
unverifiable. Which I mean, VAERS is there.
It's not verified. It can be verified eventually, but at this.
I mean,
point,
some cases you can't. I mean, you can. I think all you have to do as far as identifying information is put in an email address. You can put in a phony email address. So some of that stuff you can't even really track it down.
I see what you're saying.
And so, I mean, I don't know what you do with that information.
We basically used a fucking Facebook poll in order to determine whether or not people have died from COVID.
Yeah, I mean, essentially.
Yeah.
But it's on a government website. And that's the difference. And so you mentioned actually it might be a good time to talk about the myocarditis thing, because the myocarditis thing is right now just like a Twitter storm, okay, among healthcare professionals, okay? And all the healthcare professionals that I respect, that I feel like are really intellectually honest and they're really trying to get to the bottom of the science, are really upset with that paper that came out. So that paper came out and it did say that within a very small subset group of people, which was, I think, boys or male children between a certain age, and I don't remember, somewhere in adolescence. I don't remember if it's 12 to 17 or 13 to 15 or whatever it is. But it said that they have a higher risk of developing myocarditis than those that are vaccinated. Or wait, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Those that got vaccinated are at higher risk for developing myocarditis than those that were that actually had COVID, which is kind of an unusual thing. And it wasn't seen in any other age group, just this one age group with just boys. It's not seen with girls, and that's I think they were talking about that on Joe Rogan. They've been talking about that everywhere. So essentially the summary slide for that study is the COVID vaccine causes myocarditis to our boys. It's hurting our boys more than COVID is itself.
Yeah.
But where did they get that data? It was pulled directly from VAERS.
Yeah. Okay. So there's the problem.
And so there's the problem. It's like, okay, like maybe it is. I'm not saying it's not. Maybe it is. But one, myocarditis, generally speaking, is treated with supportive care. It's not a life-threatening condition. It can't, I mean, in rare cases, you can get a severe form, but most cases are what we call just kind of like time limiting. You treat it with NSAIDs, which are just Motrin or, Aleve, simple things. So one, it's not the most concerning medical condition.
Yeah.
But two, that we don't even know if that's actually true.
Right.
But I mean, I think it's important for us to know. We need to do further studies and find out if that is true, but it's coming, they're just taking that data from VAERS.
Okay.
And they're taking that study from VAERS, that data from VAERS, and they're comparing it to legitimate data that we have on COVID incidences of myocarditis.
Well,
so you know what I'm saying? You shouldn't be doing that.
Well, let's take the we're talking 176 million people vaccinated in the country. There's a statistical probability that someone's going to die. Period. If you take any group of 176, the idea that you'd have a group of 176 million people do anything at all, stand in a parking lot together, someone is going to die. Like there's a statistical probability of someone dying of something. And so that's always where I had an issue. Like, again, you remember, I don't want to get too far into this, but there was whenever we went to in Iraq in 2003, they were saying, well, this many troops had passed away. And I was like, well, it's not. You had a group of 4 million people and this many people died. You can't compare it to zero. You have to compare it to if you take any group of 4 million people, someone's going to die. Every year we have Electric Daisy Carnival here in Las Vegas. And most years, at least 1 or 2 people die. Sometimes 3 people die. One year, I think we had no one die, and everyone was like, "Oh, rejoice!" And I'm like, "No, like you guys don't understand. Anytime this sounds very dark when I say this, but if you understand statistical probability, you'll get it. If you have any group of 300,000 people in a place with limited water and toilets, the likelihood of excessive dehydration or something else like that happening, not to mention overdosing, the likelihood that someone is going to die is pretty high. So again, same situation. They're not saying that the vaccines will have zero adverse effect on 0 people. That's not the point. The point is to compare it to COVID. It always has to be vaccine compared to COVID.
No, yeah, I'm truly. While you're talking, I just pulled up a stat just kind of out of interest, just so people don't realize this. We live our own lives. We don't consider like what's happening at, like you said, at the large scale, because our brain doesn't work that way. Yeah. Right. Like, I know you like to talk a lot about evolutionary biology, but that's not necessarily evolutionarily helpful for us to consider what's going on with everybody else in the world around us at all times. Like we're considered about our own selves. But so I just pulled it up right now. Within the last minute, on average, every minute, 5 Americans die. Yeah. So we were just talking the last 60 seconds. 5 people died.
5 people died.
Okay. Maybe 3 of those people got vaccinated the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But does that at all state causality?
No.
And so like
that doesn't state causality.
For sure. If we said, I mean, and you could be very ridiculous about this, but sometimes the examples or the lessons are learned in kind of the absurdity. So we could say, like, out of everyone had, we wanted to say how many people had coffee this morning. Okay. And maybe that was 200 million people had coffee. And then we just saw the people
Someone's going to die.
Yeah, some of them are going to die.
Someone's going to die.
Someone's going to die. We say like, well, they had coffee an hour before.
Well,
that's a link.
Let's make a government website and then start doing that. So are there any other misconceptions that you want to go over?
So we covered the DNA thing. We covered
Natural immunity.
Natural immunity versus I mean that's a big one too. I mean you can't restate that enough. You know, you don't want to get COVID. Trust me, you don't want to get COVID. It's been a common occurrence with me the last month, and I could say a lot of my ER doctor friends are saying the same. We have people that are so regretful. People that come in, I ask every single person, I say, why did you not get vaccinated? I was like, you know, I'm not here to judge. I'm just curious. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn what's going on out there. A large majority of those people, they tell me, I was just scared. I was confused. There was lots of misinformation out there. There was lots of conflicting information. Very few people are hardcore anti-vax.
Yeah.
But the hardcore anti-vax community is being very loud, and they're harming people. But then they say, you know, I just didn't know what to do, you know? And then a certain subset of that group will cry or be very regretful and say that they wish they got vaccinated.
Yeah.
You know, say, I wish I wasn't here right now.
Yeah. No, I've seen that. I've definitely anecdotally seen that also. To go back to what you were saying before, Dunbar's number, I don't know if you remember this from psychology. The human brain can only have like really serious connections with about 150 people, because that's how big our tribes were. And if you remember, that's about how big our military units were, about 150 people. And that's the reason why that number because after that, then they're not faces anymore. So now I'm Joe Rogan, and I know 2 people who've gotten a stroke. So now my Dunbar's number, my anecdotal experience is that, no, this number is way out of whack. These 2 young, healthy people have gotten a stroke. Therefore, my anecdotal information is now overrides whatever statistical peer-reviewed information that I'm getting. And therefore, these vaccines may cause strokes in lots of people.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. I mean, yeah, we are very, very, very affected by the personal narrative. We see anecdotal stuff that happens around us. That's more powerful than the statistics. But the statistics is really where we're able to do the population-based. That's where we're able to find the truths, right? In terms of what's the causality, because the world's a complicated place.
Well, the world's a complicated place, and statistics are supposed to make that simple, like a little bit more simple. Now, here's the next thing I want to ask you: the study in Israel where they talked about you're more likely to get COVID if you take the vaccine. Did I give you that one?
Yeah, you sent that to me. One it's not peer reviewed yet. Okay. And so this is a great point of discussion as well. Is right now we're seeing just a proliferation of science, right?
Yeah.
One like we've never seen before. And there's so much science being done, it's hard to even keep up.
Yes.
And it's all going to the public prior to you having this process, which is critically important in the scientific method, is the peer review process.
I have seen at least 5 studies that are not complete that were already in the newspaper. And then when you go, there's a section in these studies for conflict of interest. I read one sent to me by not the same person, but another person who had sent in some of the questions for today. And I read it under conflict of interest. Every single person involved had been involved in some sort of COVID or autism litigation. Every single person. So vaccine autism litigation. And it was just like insane to me how this whole thing worked, where it was just like these things have not been peer reviewed yet, and we're already talking about them.
Yeah, it's just it's an interesting problem that we have to encounter now as healthcare workers and as scientists, because the media and the public are latching on to these conclusions before they've been vetted. Yeah. And then there was I don't even know if we want to open up this can of worms, but the ivermectin thing.
Okay, so we're going to go to that next.
But so there was the study that showed the most efficacy for ivermectin, and it was also kind of a foundational study within the meta-analyses that showed that ivermectin may work. And again, there are other meta-analyses that show it don't. So that's important to understand. You have to, when you look at any of these questions, you have to look at the compendium, the totality of the science, not just what you want to be true. So the meta-analyses that did show, and I guess maybe we should describe what a meta-analysis is. Yeah. It's considered like the highest form of a research paper, because what it's doing is it's taking a whole bunch of other research papers and it's putting them together. Yeah. And it's trying to statistically find the signal for different papers. Yeah. And so there were several meta-analyses that came out that said that ivermectin could be effective for COVID. The foundational paper there was later proven to be fraudulent. It's now since been redacted and removed. It was found that a lot of there was some plagiarism in that. There was using data from people that had died prior to even the COVID outbreak. The COVID outbreak. I mean, it was a very problematic study. And so when you remove that study from a lot of these meta-analyses, there wasn't actually any effect. But people don't want to talk about that. And so again, it's important to know that the peer review process is critical to catching that stuff before it becomes part of the conclusions that the public is using to make decisions. Like it shouldn't be made. You shouldn't be making decisions based on preprint data.
And instead, we're already posting Facebook stories about studies that are not complete and have not been peer reviewed.
Yeah, and we're only posting and certain people.
And we're only posting studies that show the outcome.
That show the outcome that we desire, for sure. Because that study, that Israel study, is interesting. I'm waiting to see, like, once it goes through the peer review process and see what people think of it. I think I took some notes on it, but
while you're looking at notes, there's one thing I also want to say here. If you get the flu and your grandma comes over and burns sage in your bedroom and puts crystals in there, and then all of a sudden you recover from the flu, it doesn't matter how you feel about it. That didn't cure you from the flu. Okay, this is a really important thing for people to understand. They'll try some treatment and then they'll be like, well, it feels like this treatment helped, therefore it helped. Joe Rogan is not I have the most respect for Joe Rogan. Obviously, I'm his biggest fan. Joe Rogan can't tell you whether or not ivermectin, because I know he took ivermectin when he got COVID. That doesn't mean ivermectin cured him from COVID, just like it doesn't mean that hydrochloroquine cured Donald Trump from COVID. That's not the way it works. That when you're a patient, you don't get to tell the doctor, this cured me because I feel like it cured me. There has to be peer-reviewed science. And here's the other part that a lot of people are having problems with: a virus, a bacteria, and a parasite. They don't seem to understand how those things work. For instance, like, have you ever seen people get a virus and they take a Z-Pack and you're just like, well, I don't know that this antibiotic is going to kill a virus, because they don't understand that a virus, like we said before, replicates your RNA, whereas a bacteria is separate from you. It's an actual separate life form. A parasite is a separate life form. You are giving medication in the case of ivermectin, and just tell me if I'm wrong here. You're giving a medication in the case of ivermectin and hydrochloroquine, which is made to kill parasites, to fight something that is a virus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's true. We think about these things in different categories, and there definitely are different categories.
Yeah, but hold on. The layperson does not.
Yeah.
The layperson does not think of these in different categories. He thinks an antibiotic is going to cure his virus. That's the point I'm trying to make. They don't understand the difference between bacteria, virus, parasite. They don't understand the difference. That's how we would even get to the point to even postulate that hydrochloroquine would kill a virus.
Well, so there's nuance here, right?
Okay.
And so I think, to be intellectually honest about it, the reason that some of these medicines that are not categorized as antivirals were looked at is they have shown, in the test tube, in vitro, that there may be some antiviral properties. So ivermectin was shown to, at very high doses though, and that's important to note, at very high doses in a test tube, stop viral replication of SARS-CoV-2 in cells. That's great. Like, that's the basic science saying, like, we should explore this more. But we have countless examples of these types of things happening at the bench in the basic science moment that don't translate into success or efficacy in the actual human body, because the human body is a pretty complicated place. There's enzymes, there's deliveries, there's like channels on the there's different molecular biochemical things happening that may not allow what's happening in the test tube to happen in the human body. Not to mention the fact that every medicine has a toxic dose.
Yeah.
Can we achieve the same dose in the human body that we can at the in the test tube and allow it to be effective, but it's not going to cause such bad adverse reactions and effects that it's worth taking.
So what you're saying is, even though in a test tube ivermectin has been shown to slow down some of the viral replication, it has not shown to do that in Homo sapiens.
That's true. Okay. Well, no. Well, I mean, that last comment you made would, if you're bullish on ivermectin, you're interpreting the data a different way. I would say my interpretation of the data is similar to the consensus opinion by most people that are really looking at this. And I would also argue the people that are the least biased or the most unbiased on this, that are just trying to look at it objectively, whether or not it works. And the consensus in that side is that ivermectin does not have enough support yet to say it works and let's go ahead and use it. And that's what the CDC says, that's what the FDA says, that's what the WHO says, and every other reputable organization. Now, if you don't trust those reputable organizations, that's where you're starting from. If that's important to you and you have mistrust for them, and that mistrust also then leaks into any physician that also supports that, then I'm not gonna be able to convince you.
Correct.
But
I have family members that think because I was in the U.S. military that I've been brainwashed.
Yeah.
They think that when I got those vaccines that there are literal nanobots inside of me that changed my. I'm not kidding, dude.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I mean, yeah.
So
I get that.
we'll get back to the science.
But actually, I
Go ahead.
want to say one thing else though about ivermectin, because this is, I think, an interesting point, because there are a small number of very vocal people that I'm hearing like that are very bullish on ivermectin. Okay, and some of those scientists were well credited, and they had great reputations. The one thing that I see that's common between all these different people that we're hearing on this topic, and Joe Rogan's now in this camp, Pierce Corey.
To be fair, Joe Rogan is not saying that ivermectin cured him. He's saying it could have. He said, let's just try different things. He's
also been having lots of people on he had an emergency podcast where he brought on Brett Weinstein, Brett Weinstein's a very interesting individual. He's incredibly smart. His brother Eric as well. I mean, there are people that I think they have big followings.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't want to misstate. I don't think Eric Weinstein even believes in ivermectin the same way Brett does. But these people that you hear about, there's others as well. They all have one thing in common. They got on the ivermectin camp. They became part of the ivermectin tribe very early on. Became big believers, and they've staked a significant part of their reputation in that drug.
Right.
And so it's interesting because these people all have that one variable in common. And even when other studies come out to show that maybe ivermectin is good, what they do is they try to find every hole in it. They try to beat it down. It seems like at this point, the ivermectin thing has become a religion for them. And
I mean, the scientific method would be for their hypothesis of ivermectin for them to be the ones to try to disprove their own hypothesis, and they're choosing to not do that.
Exactly.
Like I listen, I've gone down this rabbit hole. I significantly actually tried to disprove my own hypothesis that vaccines do not cause autism and that vaccines are not more dangerous than COVID. And I have tried very vociferously to do this, and I have not been able to. I have not found any at all peer-reviewed studies in either one of those cases to knock me off these two hypotheses. These are mine hypotheses, by the way. And get ready, guys. Ready? Hold on to your dicks. I didn't vote for Joe Biden. Okay, so I don't care at all. I think they're both fucking two 70-year-old racist men. I don't give a shit about Joe Biden or Donald Trump. The situation is, in this case, it's just crazy to me. So I wanted to go into this. We can go back to the science if you want. How these conspiracies, number one, how they affect you, where you think they came from, and as humans, why do we latch onto them so much?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And there's been papers written on why people are so captivated by conspiracies and conspiracy theories. And it's also interesting because we see a much higher likelihood for people to engage in beliefs in conspiracy theories when we're in a time period of social unrest, civil unrest, uncertainty. And I think that like evolutionarily, that's we're looking for a cause for the trauma that we're experiencing maybe.
Yeah.
And it's easier to have a thing, a quantifiable, a tangible phenomenon, a person, an entity that maybe is more powerful than us to blame
And
than
COVID doesn't have a face. It doesn't have
exactly.
eyeballs.
Then to say like
it doesn't have a it doesn't have an IG.
Yeah.
COVID. It's hard to blame COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
So we need the enemy, right? It's part of the narrative, right? I mean, look at that's what Hollywood is, right? We love the narrative. We love the story. We need a good guy and a bad guy. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it also is like just in modern society, we can be a little bit bored sometimes.
Yeah.
I think there's part of it. I remember as a kid, I got really into the Freemasonry conspiracy, and I became obsessed. And I started reading it was like early days.
Those were fun.
Early days internet, literally on AOL. And me and my cousins, we'd stay up all night. We had like notebooks, and we were kind of crack the code and the Illuminati and the Freemasonry, and we got really into that. And it was entertaining.
Yes,
it was exciting, and it was. For me, it was like, we're part of this big story, and like maybe we're the underdog against like the big machine. And I think there's something about that also captivates people.
So let's talk about two things. Number one, the part that is so incredibly disappointing to me is that there are so many real things that people have done unethically, like Volkswagen lying about the diesel engines, or the Tuskegee experiments, or the fact that the CIA allowed crack cocaine into the United States in the 1980s, 1990s, stuff like that. There were so many things that happened. Like, for instance, there's so many things that we did in this country that are actual conspiracies. It was really funny when Julian Assange let out all those WikiLeaks to everybody, and people were still trying to pin 9/11 on George Bush. He was like, it's like, I've given you so much information. There's so many people to expose here, and you're still worried about Bush planning 9/11. Please stop. Focus on the real there are real conspiracies out there. You remember all those bankers that went to jail after the '08 housing crisis? You remember all those guys?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. None of them went to fucking jail. How about let's talk about that? But we don't. We want to talk about Bush planning 9/11, or we didn't land on the moon in 1969. And it's just really crazy to me that so that's the first part. It's really disappointing. The second thing is actual physics, science, and biology, to me, is more interesting than crystals and the zodiac. If you actually took some time to understand biology, it is so much more interesting. The actual real world that we live in, especially when you call into things like quantum mechanics or astrophysics, it's so much more entertaining to me and more fulfilling than trying to believe that I can't date this guy because Mercury's in retrograde, and then installing this hokum into my life. And now that's how I make decisions. I can't date this guy because he's got a black cat, or I can't sign this contract because Mercury's in retrograde. The real world is more interesting than this fiction that you've created based on zodiac signs or based on boogeymen like Bill Gates. That's the other thing that I was going to say, and I forgot there was another part. Oh yeah, so the thing you were asking about before. Number one, the human brain is designed to spot patterns, right? It's designed to spot patterns when there are no patterns. Like for instance, in 2013, a Nobel Prize was awarded for efficient market hypothesis. You have an MBA, you understand the whole idea that you can't really pick market direction, but thousands of people on Facebook who try to sell you a product saying you can pick market direction. Do you understand what I'm saying? They don't want to look at this. They want to believe, okay, there's a pattern here. There's a cup and saucer pattern, right? Someone has born with this horrible tragedy of having a child with autism, right? It's still a blessing to have this incredible child, but a lot of people are like, well, I need someone to blame. And I'm not going to believe in Charles Darwin's idea of natural selection or like random mutations throughout evolution. So instead, I need to blame Monsanto. I need to blame Johnson & Johnson. I need to blame Pfizer for creating this vaccine that caused my child to get autism. And so that's where I kind of believe a lot of these conspiracies come from. And a third thing, somewhere along the line, there was some authority figure that was shown to be a hypocrite to them. Right, I have a friend of mine, she was in the military, and she was sexually assaulted by her superior while she was in the military. And from that, I believe she's taken that. This woman also believes that the earth is flat. This happens to be the same woman. I believe that what she's done is now she's taken this hypocrisy from one authority source, and now she has transposed that to all authority sources. And so we do that in combination with the fact that we're always looking for these patterns, and therefore the conspiracy theory, it fits better. And because we were never taught the scientific method, and or fundamental laws of physics, biology, or whatever, now it's very easy to trick us. But for most part, ivermectin isn't going to cure a virus, even if it works, and neither is hydrochloroquine.
No, I mean, it seems really unlikely. I mean, is there going to be potentially a small signal that it's helpful? It's still possible. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that ivermectin will ultimately show to be somewhat effective against COVID, because we need some therapies. But I'm less hopeful than I was a couple months ago based on new research. And I'm not emotionally attached to it. That's what makes me different than I think Brett Weinstein and Joe Rogan. I mean, I'm all about prescribing a medicine that's shown to be effective for my patients. But I want to see the research. I don't want to just because I hear people talking about it on Twitter, I'm going to start prescribing it. And there are physicians that I think that maybe sometime based on their political affiliation or just the fact that they maybe are not getting into the science enough, that are willing to prescribe things that are not FDA approved. But I think the majority of us really want to see that something works for our patients, or not going to harm our patients.
Yeah, I'm with you. If somebody could actually show me science that these vaccines are more dangerous than getting the virus, or that vaccines cause autism, I would be open to seeing it. If someone could actually show me a survey where you had 60,000 children who've been vaccinated, 60,000 who hadn't, and you could actually show a difference in autism level.
Well, the vaccine autism debate is, in my mind, just completely, it's dead. It's done. We should not commit any more money towards researching that. That has been researched more than almost any topic in all of of human medicine. That's been looked at to such a degree and in every single way at every angle, and there is no statistical causality there. So let's actually take that money and let's try to figure out what is causing autism in my mind. We do want to address the problem, but I think looking at continuing to poke the vaccine is not the best way to go. I understand people are very concerned about vaccines. It seems like it's very intrusive and intimate. It's injected into you. It's this other foreign body. So I think that's part of why. It's not
just a foreign body. It's a foreign body produced by a company that is publicly traded on the NASDAQ.
And then it's also now it's being mandated, so people feel
Correct.
And so there's lots of things about the vaccine, just the variables that make people uncomfortable, and I get that. Lots of things that kind of just touch us in a way, just viscerally, and our primitive brain reacts against, and so that's part of this conversation too. And I'm not trying to discount that, but there's lots of things like that as well that we know are harmful to us that we have. We know that we are evolutionarily going to be more desirous of unhealthy foods, right?
Sugar,
we know
salt, and fat.
Yeah, and so there's certain things that evolutionarily we are going to be repelled against or desire that are not helpful for us. They're not healthy for us, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the science and believing in the science really tells us that, right? We had to actually study the effect of sugar on our body before we knew that sugar was unhealthy for us.
Right.
Like we had to do the basic science.
Well, our
there.
ancestors would be able to gorge themselves once a week,
Yeah.
right? Because they're inconsistently killing game in order to live, and they would gorge themselves. That's how that would live 50,000 years ago. Now we can gorge ourselves at McDonald's 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why. I don't know if you've ever seen, Jared Diamond has a book called The World Until Yesterday, I believe. And he talks about there's these Inuit Indians that once they were introduced to McDonald's, just massive amounts of diabetes. Like these people just incredible weight gain, horrible health effects because these people had been gorging themselves their whole life with very little food source, and now they had unlimited food and they almost killed themselves. Yeah, so for evolutionarily, we don't always want what's best for us.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're saying.
Exactly,
I get that.
Yeah.
Definitely. So that's a big thing. One last thing, a couple things. One thing, how do I deal with a family member or a close friend who is so emotionally tied to the outcome? Like they don't know fuck all about science, but they are 100% sure that hydrochloroquine cures coronavirus and that the media is hiding this incredible secret because they want the vaccine companies to be rich. And when you try to state anything other than that, they become like loud, lots of profanity, cut you off, start sending you article after article. Well, how and you as a doctor, you have to deal with this. And I'm just curious, how would you recommend somebody who has a family member, a loved one, or a coworker that is this far on the spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just need to realize that some people are not going to be reachable for a large number of things. I mean, if I start to notice that someone is getting emotional about something that should not be emotional, like your belief on hydroxychloroquine should not create an emotional reaction. It really shouldn't. We're talking about a medication and whether or not it's effective or not. But if you notice that person now is having a visceral emotional reaction, like now we're in a religious conversation.
Yes.
They're just the religion of hydroxychloroquinism, right? And now you know how it is. When you start to talk about religion with people, it's going to be hard. I think the only way for some of those people is to actually have a true real world experience with COVID or with something like that. Yeah,
that's unfortunate.
Some
what
people
you're
need to
saying
have
is correct,
that,
right?
yeah.
But what the reality of the situation. So I'm going to get to the last thing. This is my hypothesis, and you tell me if you agree with this. I'm afraid of I'm not going to say that vaccines are safer. I'm going to tell you every single statistical thing and every single scientific study that I've seen shows me that vaccines are safer. I'm not going to talk about my opinion. My opinion doesn't matter. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to tell you that vaccines don't cause autism. I'm going to tell you that every single peer-reviewed paper that I've seen, every single one, indicates to me that it does not. It's not my opinion. My opinion doesn't matter. Whether or not OJ killed Nicole is not my opinion. He either killed him or he didn't kill him. It doesn't matter what I think. Gravity exists whether or not I believe in it. Okay, so that's a situation that I'm talking about. So when I take that and I have this conversation with this person and they get really upset, one of the things that I've seen commonly is a lack of background when it comes to any scientific understanding. Any scientific understanding. You understand? You didn't get an A in physics class and become a flat earther. You don't understand how gravity works, period, in order for you to get that far down the path. And I also think, like you said, I'm just talking about hardcore anti-vaxxers. For the most part, because a lot of people in this country do not have any sort of scientific background. This is what Neil deGrasse Tyson said. You didn't use reason and logic to get you into this position, so I can't use reason and logic to get you out of it.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. So that's definitely a big issue that I've seen over and over again, and it makes it difficult. But you're right. I mean, maybe some people you just can't get to, you can't reach. There's a lot of people very angry that we're even going to have this discussion. There's three things that I look for basically whenever I get into discussion, and this is kind of how for those of you who get in discussion maybe with a family member, this is how you kind of know things are getting out of hand, and or you're dealing with somebody who's kind of losing the argument. One, they keep changing the subject. You had questions before, and they switched over to autism, and they switched over talking about the medication, not Ritalin, what's it called? I can't even.
Oh, Adderall?
I've never taken Adderall, so I don't know.
Oh, just stimulants.
Yeah, so they would switch. The conversation would go from vaccines, and then they would go to Adderall, and they would go to the corruption of the vaccine companies, and then the conversation would go to abortion. So a switch in topics is one tactic that you'll see a lot of people use. Another one that you'll see a lot of people use is making you disprove a negative, which is like, hey, you know what? Disprove that all your peer-reviewed scientific papers are not corrupted by Pfizer. Prove that they aren't. And of course, this is intellectually dishonest in order for you to do something. And then the third thing is for you to get personal. When somebody starts talking about, again, this is what happened with Neil deGrasse Tyson and the flat earthers, right? They go after his family, they go after his background. When they go off and they make personal attacks. So those three things, whenever I see this, and we're going to see this in the comments for this on YouTube, whenever I see those things, these are people being intellectually lazy and don't want to hear the other side of the story. So I always, whenever you get into a discussion about it, I always look for those three things whenever I'm discussing this with somebody else. Anything else you want to go over?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's important to note is just it is important to really look at where the consensus of the scientific opinion is, and it's a moving target, right? Science is always humble. Science should be unemotional. It should try to find the truth.
Yes,
but it's hard to do. It's a messy process. So where the consensus is most likely going to be true. There might be the next Albert Einstein, the next Galileo that has the answer that's going to radically change things. But for the most part, science works in slow iterations, right? And that's where the peer review process is important. And so another thing that you see with the people that are proponents of the conspiracy theory is they find the one PhD in physics that supports flat Earth. And therefore, that's their guy. Yeah. Flat Earth is true. Even though, every single other guy says, and gal, that no, flat Earth is ridiculous. So if you're constantly finding the one person that already just, proves the point that you're trying to make, you need to be careful. My favorite
is the anti-vaxxers who make fun of the flat earthers. Those are the best. Yeah. I love those guys. Those guys are really hilarious. As the area of our knowledge increases, so does the perimeter of our ignorance.
Yeah, that's a great.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I've heard that similar with islands and shores.
Correct. Yeah. So the perimeter of our ignorance, what if you're religious, then that perimeter of ignorance, it must be explained by God. And if you're somebody who believes in conspiracy theories, then the perimeter of that ignorance must be explained by corruption, must be explained by the Illuminati, the Rothschilds, or Bill Gates. That's what explains the ignorance. And so that's the problem. Like, one of these things is like when you don't have a horse in the fight, and you can be unbiased about it and just look at the science. And then I use this one all the time. 600,000 people worked on the Apollo and Gemini project. 600,000 people. So if we fake the moon landing, all of them are psychopaths. Do you understand?
Yeah. 600,000
of them are habitual pathological lying psychopaths. All of them. Not even a single one of them isn't. And that's the part that whenever I explain that to people, like, we did land on the moon because it was easier to land on the moon than to fake a moon landing.
Yeah, no, you're right.
600,000 people involved.
Well, I think those of us that have worked in the federal government, DOD or whatever branch, like,
dude, the idea that we could fake a moon landing in the federal government.
When you talk about these massive conspiracy theories, you just see that it's not possible because it's so messy and sloppy, and it would be harder to actually have the conspiracy and have everybody be aligned. Like, there's no whistleblowers, there's no leakers, there's nobody that's having an affair with someone that wants to ruin. You know what I mean? Like, that stuff doesn't happen.
The one with autism, the one with autism, I always thought was funny. It was like, well, you and me. So like, you're at Johnson & Johnson and I'm at Pfizer. We have to have a phone call to make sure that we cause the same amount of autism.
Yeah.
Because if you cause too much autism and I don't cause enough autism with my vaccine, then they're going to figure out that it was the virus, and then the gig is up.
Oh, that's
so that means we have to have monthly calls where we make sure we all cause the same amount of autism in all. No. Here's another idea. Autism is partially genetic. That's partially what it is. And vaccines don't cause autism. That's another hypothesis. Again, let me say this one more time. I'm not saying that vaccines don't cause autism. I'm saying that every single peer-reviewed thing that I've seen states that there is no correlation between vaccines and autism. I'm not saying that vaccines are safer than catching COVID. I'm telling you that every single peer-reviewed thing that I've seen allows me to do that. And I live in a world where I'm talking to you guys on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and I'm living in this world where all the science and technology comes from peer-reviewed ideas and using the scientific method to disprove our own hypothesis so that we can come up with new technology. I'd rather believe in that world. Are there people that are corrupt? Fuck yes, there are people that are corrupt. Of course, we saw them when we were in the military. Like I still can't to this day understand why Lockheed Martin gets every fighter jet. Every single fighter jet's made by Lockheed Martin. For real, like that never made sense to me. Boeing makes better airplanes. I'm just gonna say that. Sorry, off on a tangent, but not anymore. They used to make. I'm sorry. Let me say
that's a
yeah. Sorry. Back in the 70s and 80s, Boeing make better airplanes. Anyway, I'm on a funny tangent. The point I'm trying to make is. The reality of the situation is, are there conspiracies? Of course. But when, like you said, when we work for the federal government, the idea that we'd be able to fake something like that is just so ridiculous because it was just too many moving parts. And so, like you said before, I think people are just kind of grasping on something for an explanation. Because, dude, dealing with somebody dying or dealing with somebody having a genetic disorder, man, it must be so hard to deal with, and you're going to look for some answers.
For sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I did want to say a couple things in summary.
Yeah.
One, the morbidity and mortality report that came out last week by the CDC, we should link to that, but it shows vaccinated versus unvaccinated in terms of infections, hospitalizations, and death. And that's after the Delta variant was here. And it showed a 5 times more likelihood for being infected if unvaccinated, 10 times more likelihood of being hospitalized. That's if unvaccinated, and a greater than 10 times more likelihood of dying if unvaccinated. These are all being compared to the vaccinated group. This is actually looking at real people since the vaccine has been distributed, and that's in the period of Delta. And so, in summary, I think
the period of the Delta variant.
The period of the Delta variant.
Got
so
it.
the newest variant, the one we're seeing now. It was in July where that became the majority of the COVID we're seeing. But I mean, we get out of this pandemic through vaccination. We do.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think it's a controversial thing to say, and I totally believe in that. It's not going to be through ivermectin. It's not going to be through, through remdesivir, any of these other treatments. It's going to be through getting enough people immune, and that can happen in 2 ways. So it can happen by getting natural immunity, which again is going to cause a lot of carnage. It's going to cause a lot of deaths. It's going to cause a lot of morbidity. It's going to cause a lot of like really high hospital bills and a lot of sadness that could be avoided. Or it's going to happen through vaccination. And so I'm a big believer in vaccination. I can tell you just what I'm seeing in the ER and what all of us are seeing in the ER across the country is if you're unvaccinated, you're going to have a much, much worse course and a much more likelihood to go to the hospital. So I can't say it enough. I mean, I know I'm not going to convince that many people, but I think vaccination is the way we end this pandemic.
I think there's a lot of people who are just looking for something. Again, you and I don't work for Facebook. This is not, you know what I'm saying? To me, I think the misinformation comes from a lot of untrustworthy people. I don't have a dog in this fight.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? I live in Las Vegas. I'm just trying to read and trying to understand as much as I can. And I'm not using Facebook as a primary source. Neither are you, right? You have a medical degree. So I think that's kind of the issue where I think we can make a little bit of change. And the other thing, the last thing I want to leave you with, we had a war on drugs in the early 90s. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And it created kind of a part where it was almost like a prosecution of people who were using drugs and selling drugs, and it didn't solve the problem. It actually got worse. I'm a little bit hesitant to mandate all this stuff, even though I fully agree with your idea about people getting vaccinated. I think, and whether or not it's mandated, it's not up to us. Some government official is going to figure this out without our input. But the thing is, I would way rather a discussion like ours cause people to go get vaccinated of their own volition than for them to have to be forced to get vaccinated and create more vitriol towards the government or the medical community. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Nobody likes to be
told what to do.
Yeah,
right?
We don't like that. None of us like that. We're free Americans for sure. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, guys, I want to say thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it to this point, man. I'm so excited that you guys are coming along on this journey with me. I know, I've had a lot of different type of guests on that have very different opinions, very different viewpoints. Like I said before, and I've told, maybe you want to join me for this. I want 7 flat earthers versus me on here at one point. Like that's something I'm very excited to go up and to do. The fact that you guys are taking your intellectual curiosity and coming along with me, I really do appreciate that. We have some incredible guests coming up, all from everything to like dating to astrophysics to all this other kind of stuff. I'm really trying to get people to read more, to become more exploratory. And in a situation like this was just a topic where I was dealing with people in my life that I care about very much, and I realized I couldn't reach them. So I needed to do something where we could talk about things that, are they irrefutable? I don't know. But are they peer-reviewed? They are peer-reviewed, and that's the reason why I wanted to do this. So anyway, I want to say one more time, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe on Spotify. Please subscribe on YouTube so you can get notifications for the next ones. Guys, please leave me comments. Let me know people that you want me to interview. I definitely want to have Rocky come back on so we can talk about some war stories and flying airplanes and all that kind of stuff. That'll be good. We didn't get into any of that with him this time, but hopefully we can have him on it again soon. We can have Jamie Lynn back on to talk more about different, therapy and psychological disorders. So please let me know which people you want, and I will see you guys next week.
Thanks, Mike. That was fun.